All right. Well, good morning, everyone. Happy Friday. We'll call the Transportation Committee of Friday, September 24th to order. I'll read a statement. As permitted by the Governor's Disaster Declaration of September 17th, 2021, the determination has been made that an in-person meeting is not practical or prudent for this committee. To ensure that the meeting is as transparent as possible, we posted the meeting materials approximately 1 week in advance. We'll provide a recording of this meeting linked on our website, and we'll take all votes by roll call. So with that, I'll ask Lindsay to call the roll.
Okay, good morning. How about we'll start with Chuck Abraham.
Here.
Darla Burkhart. Kevin Carrier. Somebody's unmuted. Lynette Ciavarella.
Here.
Liam Mooney here. The CTA. John Donovan.
Here.
Doug Ferguson.
Here.
Tony Dreep. Lisa Lawson Stark. Robert Hahn. Jessica Hector Sue.
Morning. Lindsay, I'm having trouble hearing you. I don't know if I'm the only one, but
So
there
I
seems to be
think that
some
might be
background noise.
Christina. I would see it said that maybe she fixed it. No. Christina Kopkowski?
I'm here.
Okay. John Paul Deepla?
Here.
Tom Kelso? And Troy Simpson for Kendall County?
Here.
Eric Llewellyn?
Here.
Chris Hebert?
Here.
Thank you. Tara Orban?
Here?
Jessica Ortega?
Here.
Heidi Prasad? Is Brian Carlson here for IDOT D1?
Here.
Jackie Forbes for Kane County?
Here.
Mayor Rockingham in? Joe Chauffeur?
Here.
Vig Krishnamurthy? Chris Snyder?
Here.
How about P.S. Siraj? Scott Weber? Audrey Wenick?
Here.
And Rocco Zucchero.
Present.
Thank you.
Lindsay, Leah Mooney joined after you passed her name, and Vig is coming on now, and Heidi Prasad is on audio only, so she'll only be in listen mode.
Okay, thank you for that.
Okay, thank you, everyone. And we do have a quorum, right, Lindsay?
Yes, we do.
Okay, so we'll move on to item 2, which is agenda changes and announcements. We do have one agenda change. We will be adding as an informational item near the end, so an update or some information on UWP competitive program priorities and programs. So that'll be under other business at the end. Are there any announcements? Seeing none, hearing none, we'll move on to the approval of the minutes from the last meeting. If we can scroll the screen, Doug, to that one. So approval of the minutes. So do I have a motion to approve the minutes? Oh,
I
hello.
have an edit to the minutes. This is Leah Mooney.
Okay, I'm looking for where the sound's coming from. Okay.
Okay, so on the minutes under the section that, sorry, let me scroll there real quick. My apologies for the delay here. Under the section that described other business and concerns, oh my gosh, why am I having trouble? There was a description of, okay, I apologize, my computer is screwing up here. It basically said that the answer was given at the meeting that the UWP changes didn't have to go to Transportation Committee, but actually recording what actually happened and transpired at the meeting, the answer was, we don't know and we'll have to check. So I guess if the meeting minutes are supposed to actually describe what happened at the meeting, they should say what I was told at the meeting and not what was researched and discovered after the meeting.
Okay. For some reason in my notes, I thought I had that at some point I thought it was noted that it did not go to, because I thought my notes said it, but I will defer to CMAP. Whether it was answered or not at the meeting or deferred, and then it was subsequent to the meeting, it was conveyed.
We'll make that change.
Okay. So
Thanks,
it'll be revised to indicate that the CMAP staff would research it further. Okay. Okay, then with that, I move approval of the minutes as amended, or to be amended by CMAP. Do I have a motion? Leah,
Forbes, so
thank you.
moved.
Do I have a second? Was that Jackie?
Second.
Yeah, second.
Oh, Lynette. Okay, so we have a motion and a second. No further comment, so we'll do a roll call.
All right, Chuck Abraham. Kevin Carrier. Lynette Ciavarella.
Aye.
Leah Mooney.
Aye.
Doug Ferguson.
Aye.
Jessica Hector Sue.
Aye.
John Paul Dipla.
Aye.
Tom Kelso.
Aye.
Troy Simpson.
Abstain.
Christina Kopkowski.
Aye.
Eric Llewellyn. Chris Hebert.
Aye.
Tara Orban.
Aye.
Jessica Ortega. Heidi, if you're in listen only mode, maybe you could send a chat. Brian Carlson.
Aye.
Jackie Forbes.
Aye.
Joe Schofer.
Aye.
Vig Krishnamurthy.
Aye.
Chris Snyder.
Aye.
P.S. Siraj.
I agree with the motion.
Thank you. Audrey Wennick.
Aye.
Rocco Zuccaro.
Aye.
And was there anyone whose name I didn't call?
Eric Llewellyn. Aye.
Thank you. We're good.
Okay, so the motion carries. Thank you. We'll move on to agenda item 4, committee reports. And I think we'll hear from Yusuf on that topic.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Good morning, everybody. I'm just going to be providing the summary of Aaron's comments to the board on September the 3rd. So I'll provide a summary and also a little bit of an update on some of the activities going on with Canadian Pacific and Kansas City Southern as it relates to their merger activities. So first of all, I'd like to discuss the local government network for COVID relief funding. CMAP's been working with our state partners at the Illinois Department of Commerce and Economic Opportunity to ensure every community eligible in our region can access their COVID relief funds from the America Rescue Plan. We've used our local government network to contact those municipalities that are eligible for non-entitlement unity COVID funding relief, which is being administered through the state. We're focused on those communities that have not yet accessed the state's portal. September 30th is the deadline for non-entitlement units to request their funds from the state. In regards to the Surface Transportation Board voting trust, I think all of you are aware that earlier this year, our board sent a letter to the Surface Transportation Board requesting that more information and data be shared with impacted stakeholders like our region by the Canadian National and Kansas City Southern before their merger process proceeded any further. As well as you're all aware that on August the 31st, the Transportation Surface Board unanimously decided that allowing a voting trust for their merger would not be in the public interest, and that there is a high risk it would harm competition because of the amount of overlap in the two respective organizations' rail networks. This is the first time the Transportation Service Board decided to rule against the voting trust using the public interest test since the new 2001 merger rules were established. It was a result of that the Transportation Service Board voted against the voting trust, and it is unlikely that a merger between the two entities will proceed. However, on September the 15th of this recent month, Canadian Pacific and Kansas City Southern executed an agreement to combine their two organizations, valuing the transaction at approximately $31 billion. The transaction is expected, the Transportation Service Board review of the proposed control of Kansas City Southern is expected to be completed in the second half of 2022. It's also worth noting that according to the CP press release on the matter, more than 1,000 stakeholders, including railroad, labor union, shippers, and community leaders have written letters to the Surface Transportation Board supporting the proposed combination with Kansas City Southern. There is a very good article that I'm more than happy to send the link to all of you that was done by the Canadian Pacific CEO in trains.com. Within that interview, there is mention with regards to operations here in the Chicagoland area. Specifically, the CEO was asked about a Chicago bypass for the Kansas City, Detroit, Ontario traffic using Kansas City Southern's former Gateway Western route to Springfield, Illinois. His response to that was that there is no plans for a Chicago bypass. Quote, the only bypass for Chicago will be the traffic that goes to Chicago to interchange now to other roads that can handle single line. I'm more than happy to share that interview that was done about a week ago with the CEO of CP. So I just wanted to provide an update on activities that's happening on that end. Moving forward, I just wanted to give a recap on summer events. Since our last meeting, we've been busy attending events and ribbon cuttings, and we've been very joyed by seeing how CMAP is moving forward on some important initiatives. First one I want to talk about is the organization's Future Leaders and Planning Program, which was completed earlier this summer. This is the 13th year of this program. More than 30 high school and college students participated and learned about different stages of planning and the tools they'll need to make changes in their own communities. The curriculum was redesigned this year to better reflect the agency's core values, specifically how equity impacts different parts of the planning process was discussed during each of the 4 sessions this summer. CMAP has been working with communities of Barkley and Hillside and creating new and innovative public spaces for their residents. The new story walk along the Illinois Prairie Path in Berkeley is an excellent example of how residents are being invited to enjoy open public space. CMAP was certainly a proud partner in this project. Lastly, 2 other points I should say, sorry. I want to give everyone here a reminder of our State of the Region event, which is going to be taking place on October the 7th, so please do save that date. This is CMAP's first ever State of the Region event, and we can't wait to recognize our communities and partners for the work that they've done to build an inclusive and thriving region. We look forward to sharing highlights from our public opinion survey and listening to the keynote address from public health expert Dr. Suzette McKinney. Dr. McKinney currently serves as the Principal and Director of Life Sciences for Sterling Bay. Anyone can visit the State of the Region page on our website to learn more about registering for the event. Registration is open. The event is certainly free to attend. We look forward to welcoming all of you at this inaugural event in October and we look forward to working with you all together on the Vision to 2050. Last item was the consensus data. In August of 21, the U.S. Census Bureau released their 2020 consensus data, which reflected some good news for the region. Based on the latest consensus figures, our region did not lose population as we had expected. Northeastern Illinois grew by 1.74%, or approximately 146,000 people between the years 2010 and 2020. All 7 counties in the CMAP region experienced population growth, with Kendall County growing the most. While our regional growth over the last decade may seem small or insignificant, it continues to signal the need and the priority for CMAP and its regional partners to invest in strengthening our regional assets, such as access to good paying jobs and a sustainable multimodal network. Those are the comments from the executive report that Amy provided to our board on September the 5th. Thank you.
Thank you, Yusuf. Is there any questions of the report? Hearing none, seeing none. All right, thank you. We'll move on to agenda item 5. So I'll ask that Doug will present the FY 22-26 CMAC and TAP programs for consideration and approval. So Doug.
Thanks, Chris. Good morning, everyone. As detailed in the memo in your packet, the CMAC Projects Committee has approved a program of 30 projects to be funded with CMAC and 12 projects to be funded with TAP-L in the years 2022 to 2026. These projects are located throughout the region and include transit facility improvements, transit service improvements, access to transit improvements, traffic flow improvements, bicycle facilities, and direct emission reduction projects. The recommended program of projects is the result of applying performance-based project selection and programming methodology to the 77 project applications that were received in response for the call that was issued in January of 2021. A draft of the program was made available for public comment from July 1st through the 30th. The comments that were received were mainly focused on supporting projects that were already included in the program, in the draft program, and a few that questioned some of the planning efforts that were leading to some of the projects. Based upon the nature of the comments, no changes were made to the draft program. Staff and the Project Selection Committee are committed to revising the comments, revisiting the comments as they search out and develop the next program for the next call for projects. In addition to the 17 projects recommended for funding, all projects will be sent to FHWA for eligibility determination, specifically for the CMAC projects. The program approved by the Project Selection Committee has been incorporated into TIP Amendment 22-00.1 and 22-00.2. And today's staff is requesting you recommend approval of this TIP amendment to the CMAP board and MPO policy.
Thank you, Doug. So are there, well, I'll go ahead and request a motion to approve the TIP amendments to 22-001 and 22-002 that incorporate the 22-26 CMAC and TAP programs for MPO policy and board approval. So I'll entertain a motion for that.
I'll motion.
Thank you, Lynette. Is there a second? Leah, there's a second. Thank you. Are there any questions? Seeing none? All right, I'll ask Lindsay to take the roll.
Okay, we'll start with Chuck Abraham. Kevin Carrier. Was having some technical issues before. Lynette Ciavarella.
Aye.
Leah Mooney.
Aye.
Doug Ferguson.
Aye.
Jessica Hector Sue.
Aye.
John Paul Deepla.
Aye.
Tom Kelso.
Yes.
Troy Simpson.
Aye.
Christina Kopkowski.
Aye.
Eric Llewellyn. Chris Hebert.
Aye.
Tara Orban.
Aye.
Jessica Ortega.
Aye.
Heidi Prasad, maybe in the chat. Brian Carlson,
Aye.
thank you. Jackie Forbes,
Aye.
Joe Schofer,
Aye.
Big Krishnamurthy,
Aye.
Chris Snyder,
Aye.
P.S. Siraj,
Aye.
Audrey Wennick,
Aye.
Rocco Zucchero.
Aye.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. The motion carries. Moving on to item 5.2. This will be a presentation by CAMA on the 22-26 STP shared fund for consideration. So I'll turn it over to CAMA.
Thank you, Chris, and good morning, everyone. This is going to sound hauntingly familiar. As detailed in the memo in your packet, the STP Project Selection Committee has approved a program of 17 projects to be funded with the STP Shared Fund in fiscal years 22 through 2026. This program includes 8 projects programmed in the previous call for project cycle in 2019 and 9 new projects. These new projects are located throughout the region and include roadway reconstructions, bridge improvements, safety improvements, and bicycle and pedestrian barrier eliminations. The recommended active program of projects is the result of applying the performance-based project selection and programming methodology to the 61 project applications that were received in response to the call for projects that was issued in January of 2021. A draft of the program was available for public comment from July 1st through July 30th. Comments that were received focused on the type of projects targeted for funding and the scoring methodology, and those were received from 3 commenters. Based on the nature of the comments, no changes were made to the draft program. However, staff and the Project Selection Committee are committed to revisiting the comments when discussing potential methodology changes for the next program development cycle. Those discussions will begin in early 2022 and continue throughout the spring and summer of 2022. In addition to the 17 projects recommended for funding, all projects that met all eligibility criteria for the program will be included in the contingency program. Project phases included in the contingency program may be selected to move into the active program for immediate implementation if funds become available prior to the next call for projects. The program approved by the Project Selection Committee has been incorporated into TIP Amendment 2200.3, and today staff is requesting that you recommend approval of this TIP amendment to the CMET Board and MPO Policy Committee.
Okay, thank you, CAMA. So first I'll entertain a motion to approve recommending the TIP amendment 22003 to including the 22-26 STP shared fund program to the MPO policy and board. So I'll entertain a motion.
So moved.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Forbes.
Go ahead. Or Jackie.
Thank you, Jackie. Are there any questions? Okay, seeing none, hearing none, I'll ask Lindsay to take the roll. Don't hear you, Lindsay.
Sorry, I was muted. That's my first time doing that. Is Chuck able to respond, or Kevin? If not, you can send a chat, and then we'll move on to Lynette.
Aye.
Leah Mooney,
Aye.
Doug Ferguson,
Aye.
Jessica Hector Sue,
Aye.
John Paul Deepla,
Aye.
Tom Kelso,
Yes.
Troy Simpson,
Aye.
Christina Kupkowski,
Aye.
Eric Llewellyn,
Aye.
Chris Hebert,
Aye.
Tara Orban,
Aye.
Jessica Ortega,
Aye.
Heidi Prasad, if you could send a chat, Brian Carlson,
Aye.
Jackie Forbes,
Aye.
Joe Schofer,
Aye.
Big Krishnamurthy,
Aye.
Chris Snyder,
Aye.
P.S. Siraj,
Aye.
Scott Weber. Oh, sorry, he's not here. Audrey Wennick. Rocco Zucchero.
Yes.
Thank you.
All right, thank you all. Motion passes. We'll now move on to item 6.0. We'll ask that CMAP staff give us an update on activities regarding the 2050 update. So I'll turn it over to Lindsay.
Actually, I'm going to kick it off.
Okay, all right. I had a 50-50 chance and I blew it.
As you're probably all aware, CMAP is required to produce an updated regional plan every 4 years. Staff are currently underway working through a variety of technical activities to complete this update, which is due in fall of next year. Today, we're just going to share brief updates and answer questions on the progress on 4 of the activities. They include the regional socioeconomic forecast, the plan indicators, the financial plan, and the regionally significant projects. I'm now going to turn it over to, I believe, Dave. Are you going to take it? Dave Clark is going to handle the socioeconomic forecast.
Hi, can you hear me?
We can.
Okay, thanks. So I'll give a brief update on the socioeconomic forecast, and if you could advance the slide, please. So as discussed in just about every presentation we've done about the forecast, it is a 2-step process where we first generate a regional forecast and then allocate it down to the local level. So we are developing an in-house demographic model based on methods used in the original Onto 2050 forecast, and we are working with a consultant for an updated employment forecast. We have some draft regional totals, which are, you can see on the slide here, with a comparison to the previous forecast. And so our expectations for the year 2050 have been tempered due to declining birth rates and out migration or negative net migration. So we're projecting a regional population closer to 10 million by the year 2050, down from 10.8 million. And as with population, recent trends have dampened the expert consensus on employment growth in the region, with about a little over 500,000 fewer jobs by 2050. Those are just wage and salary employment. That isn't total employment, but that's what we track. So we are working on developing draft local forecasts now, and part of this process involves a new tool. It's a land use model called Urban Sim. The data are all in place for the model. We hope to have draft local forecasts in the next month or 2. Note that while this is a different tool than we used for what we called the local area allocation in the last cycle, the process will involve an emphasis on to 2050 priorities, such as transit accessibility, infill supportiveness, and reinvestment in disinvested communities. So while we expect a lower overall forecast, the distribution of the growth within the region is expected to track with the growth projected in the last forecast.
So next, we're going to move on to indicators, and Noel Peterson's going to handle those.
Thanks, Doug. Good morning, everybody. Doug, would you mind advancing the slide, please? So in keeping with the relatively limited scope of the plan update overall, we're taking a fairly restrained approach in terms of updating the indicators, especially in comparison to the process we used during the original Onto 2050 development, which included numerous rounds of committee engagement, which I'm sure some of you remember. We're essentially sticking to the mantra, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And so staff are currently reviewing all of the 47 indicators that we chose for Onto 2050, and essentially just looking for problems with the methodology that require some type of fix for us to be able to keep tracking them. So There's at least one indicator where we are no longer able to obtain the data that we needed for it, so we're looking for an alternative for that. There are other indicators that our original vision for what the indicator would look like was not possible at the time that Onto 2050 was adopted, because the data set that we had in our dreams wasn't actually a real thing yet. But so for example, our walkability indicator, we now have the regional sidewalk inventory, which we'll be incorporating into that indicator. And then, so there are a few other issues like that that we've identified. So we expect at this point to be making modifications to 9 of the indicators out of 47. That number could fluctuate a little bit, but for the most part, we'll be keeping the methodologies and targets as is. For the indicators whose methodology will be changing, that will generally result in changes to the targets as well. Excuse me, the targets as well, just because the baseline numbers are going to shift as a result of changes in methodology. So we're not proposing any new indicators. And by the end of the calendar year, we will have our proposed changes ready to circulate in some form for feedback before the public comment period begins.
All right, and then moving on, Lindsay's going to handle the financial plan.
Good morning. As many of you know, we've spent the summer getting input on our assumptions for the financial plan forecast, really at this point focusing on what we call the baseline forecast. So how much revenue under existing sources will we have over the 28-year planning period, and then how much money will we actually need to spend in order to operate, administer, and maintain the transportation system in its current condition. And as I said, we had a lot of success getting a lot of feedback and input from many of you and many others, and I want to thank everyone for all that. At this point, the baseline forecast is not totally complete yet, but I do have some preliminary numbers to share. So we actually expect that the amount of revenue under existing sources will exceed the amount that we're going to need to operate and maintain the system in its current condition. And at this point, we're looking at that to be about $20 billion. So that's actually kind of a reversal from when we did Onto 2050, where we were short about 20 billion on that baseline forecast. However, we actually are expecting the overall fiscal constraint, so meaning once we include reasonably expected revenues on the revenue side, and then on the expenditure side, once we include other investments beyond just operating and maintaining, we actually expect the overall fiscal constraint to be somewhat similar to Onto 2050. So I wanted to share a couple of reasons why, although there are many elements to this forecast. So there will be more details I'll be able to share when you guys meet next. But for one, the motor fuel tax, there was an increase, as you all know, 2 years ago. And last time we included that motor fuel tax increase as a revenue recommendation, as a reasonably expected revenue. But now, since that motor fuel tax increase actually exists, we're including it in the baseline forecast. So while the existing revenue forecast looks larger because of that, we will likely have less revenue in that reasonably expected revenue bucket that once we get around to making those recommendations later in the process. Then on the expenditure allocation side, the baseline capital maintenance forecast actually looks rosier because the system is actually in worse condition than it was when we did Onto 2050 for at least bridges and transit. So again, in this baseline forecast, we are simply looking at the amount of money that will be necessary to maintain the transportation system in its current condition. And it turns out that we have not invested at the necessary level to maintain bridge assets in the condition that they were in when we did Onto 2050 and maintain the transit system in the condition it was in when we did Onto 2050. So that means that while this baseline forecast number seems lower, that means that once we work on the allocation for improving the system and meeting our asset condition targets, we're going to need to put in more money to meet those asset condition targets than we did before. So again, the overall fiscal constraint will be including allocations for all these investments. So it's going to look similar to last time. And then again, we'll be sharing more details at your next meeting. Next slide, please. So next meeting, again, more details on the baseline forecast. And then after November, moving into 2022, we'll begin to work on recommendations for reasonably expected revenues. And then again, we'll be working on allocating funding towards that improving system condition bucket in order to meet our asset condition targets, but then also enhancing the system and then expanding the system through regionally significant projects. And that brings us to our next section of the presentation.
Thanks, Lindsay. So I'm going to handle the regionally significant projects. We have a fairly complete list of projects at this point in time. Staff is working on gathering additional project information from implementers. So we're holding meetings with different implementers to make sure that we have a good understanding of what the project entails. And it is our hope to wrap up these meetings in the next few weeks. And we'll be sure that we'll share a list of the potential project list with this committee once we have that complete. So our goal is to have all the projects assembled and then complete analysis of the projects between November and January timeframe. So with that, I think that ends our update on the Onto 2050 update. Are there any questions for myself or anybody else that presented today? Leah, I think you're raising your hand.
I am. Thanks, Doug. I might have missed this, but did you say which of the 9 indicators might be revisited in this process?
I apologize. I did not list the specific indicators, and I unfortunately do not have that list at the tip of my fingers, but I am happy to share that with you.
Yeah, just curious, interested to see what where those changes might happen. Thanks.
I have a question too, or 2 questions. So for the performance indicators for the region, will you be calculating trends, and then in the event that our trends are not going in the right direction, will we be making changes in order to address the revenue trends we do see? So that's question 1. And then question 2, the regionally significant project definition, looking at it here, it looks like it does any non-motorized projects would not be allowed according to this definition. Is that the case? If there were a large package of pedestrian and or bicycle projects that were to reach the cost threshold, would that be not permitted?
Noel, do you want to take the first question, or?
Yes, Audrey, so we have been tracking the indicators as adopted in Onto 2050 since plan adoption. We have an indicators dashboard website where you can see the latest data for any of them. And we will continue to update that following the plan update, with the caveat being that any indicators whose methodology is changed, the observed data will do what we can to retroactively recalculate those values using the updated methodology, but we'll have to update the targets for those indicators. So for the indicators whose methodology is not changing, we are not changing the targets, and so any trends showing either showing that we're falling significantly short of the goals we set in Onto 2050 or exceeding expectations, those will still be very visible in the data and the targets that we set. Does that answer your question about the indicators?
I mean, I guess what I was getting at is less of a technical calculation question and more of a kind of what's the plan if our indicators are not going in the right direction, which is a larger planning question. You know, you could reset targets to make them less aggressive, but I think you would. Anyway, I think it would be useful, perhaps for this group to see where the trends are before we, you know, lock ourselves into targets or decide that, you know, we're not making any changes to the indicators. It would be useful to know where the region is going, and I'm guessing you're probably doing it through the region events, but I think it would be good for us all to reflect on what directions we are going and how we are progressing towards reaching our targets.
So the second question, Audrey, was concerning the definition of RSPs and whether bicycle or pedestrian facilities would qualify under that. Under the first one, no, only because it was set for new or new expressways or principal arterials or new transit facilities. Under 2, and yes, if it exceeded the $250 million threshold, there was no work type set for that part of the definition. I realize that would probably be a fairly high amount for a bicycle pedestrian facility, but we have done package projects in the past, specifically PACE's ART program. That was considered as a package and not as individuals. So does that help answer your question?
And if I could jump in really quick, generally bicycle and pedestrian facilities are included under the system enhancements bucket. We generally in the past have not called out specific projects in that bucket, but they are allocated in that bucket for the purposes of the region's financial plan for transportation.
I guess, are there any other questions?
Yes, Joe Schofer here. Can you make a brief comment about the level of granularity that you'll be using for Urban Sim? From what I've seen in the past, it works at the parcel level.
David Clark, are you still on the call?
I'm here. Yeah, it is the parcel level model. So yeah, that's the level of granularity that it will be working at. We do, you know, anything, you know, with the models of this type, just because they work at that level doesn't mean they're accurate at that level. And so you always aggregate up to a larger geography to report out, but it is the parcel-based model.
Good, thank you.
Okay. Any other questions for Doug or any of the other CMAP staff? Okay, and then just in terms of schedule, I know Lindsay, you said at our next meeting, you'll be bringing finance data. Okay. Any of these other ones will come to committee in the next meeting, or are they just being rolled out in on different schedules?
Probably the RSPs will be at the next meeting. As far as the other areas, I think it'll depend on their progress over the next 2 months.
Okay. Okay, thank you, everyone, for the update. Move on to item 7, modeling of the transportation-related emissions. So we'll hear a presentation by Martin, preliminary results of the work that's been done to date on greenhouse gas emissions, specifically for our transportation sector. So I'll turn it over to Martin.
Morning, everyone. So CMAP has 3 strategic focus areas: climate, transportation, and regional economy. Today, I'm going to be talking about a project that ties 2 of those together pretty directly, maybe touches the third a little bit. Over the past year, we've been researching and modeling potential strategies to reduce greenhouse gas emissions in the region as part of CMAP's overall larger climate work. On the next slide, I want to quickly go through the work plan for climate. About a year ago, you heard from Jason Navoda about 5 work plan areas. This fiscal year, we have 8 of them. So the first 5 are the same as you heard back in August of 2020. And I'll run through these just real quick to give you some context for this project. The first work plan area is sort of overseeing all of the others and coordinating outreach and things like that. The second project area is the one that I'm presenting today, looking at different strategies and policies to reduce emissions in transportation. Number 3 is developing some guidance for our local planning group on how to incorporate climate mitigation and adaptation into plans. Number 4 is going to sort of leverage some of the heat and flooding data that we have in some new ways that should be exciting. Number 5, greenhouse gas reporting and performance monitoring. This is a project that this group heard about back in December. There's some great slides that are up on the website still from that meeting, and I'm going to repeat 1 or 2 of them today. But this team is currently focused on transitioning to the new version of EPA's MOVES model. That's the software that post-processes our modeling results to estimate the emissions of our transportation system. So a big update going on there. Number 6, looking at EV infrastructure. This is building on some of the work that IDOT has done and exploring principles to guide the installation of electric vehicle infrastructure in the region. Number 7 is an update to our 2015 inventory of greenhouse gases. And when I get to the next slide, I'll talk about that a little bit more. And then number 8 is understanding the vulnerabilities of our transportation system with regard to climate. So this is all to say that there's a lot going on at CMAP in the climate realm. And if we move on, I'll talk about a little bit more about our inventory. There it is. So this is our 2015 greenhouse gas inventory for the region. We're updating this to 2019 right now. A couple big changes are going to happen. One, the new inventory will be more detailed. So probably you'll be able to get municipal level emissions for each municipality in the region. A couple of small or medium methodology changes that will be backcast to past years so that we can still have a trend. But we're going to look at a new methodology for electricity that recognizes that this region is largely nuclear, even though our grid is not fully nuclear. So that stationary energy slice of the pie is going to shrink quite a bit. And that means for this group that transportation slice of the pie is probably going to grow and be a bigger focus or more important to our efforts to reduce emissions. And then the second sort of big change I already mentioned. We have a new model from the EPA to calculate transportation emissions. I'm told the new model is more accurate, but I am not told whether that more accurate means emissions will go up or down. So stay tuned for update on that. The next slide here comes from a presentation that Sarah and Russell gave back in December. I want to highlight just a few things. If you direct your eyes to the bottom, the blue and red bars are the vehicle miles traveled of passenger vehicles. So they're close to 90% of total vehicle miles traveled. Moving up to the top, you see that they're a much smaller share of total emissions. And that's because obviously freight vehicles per vehicle are dirtier than passenger vehicles. Freight vehicles making up over a third of emissions with a much smaller share of vehicle miles traveled. So that actually is important background for some of the modeling we did and what we targeted. So if you move on to the next slide, oh, and one after this. So what we did is we collected a whole bunch of different ideas for scenarios to model and came up with hundreds of different things we thought could impact emissions and tried to group those into some larger categories to do some sensitivity analysis with our model and just sort of understand the overarching impacts of some of these different strategies. So on the left side are the strategies that we can model in our travel behavior model, our travel demand model. Things like improving the efficiency of the system by adding capacity to the roadways or using technology or policies to shift vehicles out of peak periods. We can reduce demand by making people work from home or increasing the cost of driving. We can shift people's modes, sort of the other side of the coin from reducing demand, making transit more attractive or biking and walking and encouraging people to use cleaner and active modes of transportation. On the right side, I have vehicle and fuel technology. So we sat down to do this modeling exercise sort of in the vein of other exercises we had done using our model in the past, and we realized that our model really treats electric vehicles and gas vehicles about the same. And so there was no lever to pull in our model to say how much cleaner is the system if we electrify a large percentage of the fleet. So Moves is one of the tools that can help us do that, but Moves takes quite a while to run and we needed to run it a couple dozen times. So we've built some scripts and rates and things that help us approximate, how much of an impact would electric vehicles have. And the big question there is, and you probably know this, is how quickly is the transition to electric vehicles going to happen? So we're working on some tools to sort of build through different scenarios of how quickly things could electrify or switch to other alternative clean fuels. Let's move on to the next slide. I'm trying to click myself. Nope. So many of the scenarios we modeled had a lower greenhouse gas impact than we had initially expected. This is because as we moved vehicles off the network, new trips and longer trips replaced those, often called induced demand. So this chart just shows one of the scenarios where we moved a lot of the freight and truck trips to late night hours. This did have an impact on freight emissions, but that capacity during peak hours was quickly absorbed by passenger vehicles and passenger trips. So the net moving freight to late night hours actually increased greenhouse gas emissions to the region, which is not what we expected, but sort of that's what models are for, is to help us think through some of these problems. So interesting result there. Next slide. So speaking of freight, on the topic of freight, moving freight to off-peak periods was one of the last runs we did. As we ran through different scenarios, we found that we were having almost no impact on freight emissions. We looked at a couple different vehicle classes, and the freight emissions really didn't budge. And that's based on the model design. Freight is relatively inelastic, especially to things that we were modeling, such as changing transit or changing fuel taxes and things like that. None of those really have a big impact on freight, which is 30 to 40% of total emissions. For that reason, this year on this project, we've got an all-star team of freight experts from CMAP working on the team to think through specifically for freight different strategies to help that sector achieve some of our greenhouse gas targets. So next slide. Many of the strategies we modeled had anywhere from a 1% to 4% impact on total greenhouse gases. One area that we did model that had a bigger impact was working from home. So the bars here, we did sort of a high with 50% of people working from home and a low with 20% of people working from home. And we did this modeling about a year ago when those were maybe a little more realistic. But what you see is that it has a major impact on transit ridership, a little bit smaller impact on vehicle miles traveled, and then a little bit smaller impact on greenhouse gases. So a 4 to 10% impact from working from home on emissions was one of our bigger scenarios. So I wanted to highlight that and show how it impacts different parts of the system a little bit differently. Next slide. So we didn't just look at greenhouse gases. The model spits out NOx and PM2.5 and a couple other pollutants. And we know that many strategies that reduce greenhouse gases also benefit some of these other areas. So if you can see here, there's a pretty strong correlation between greenhouse gas change and PM2.5. We not only track this for the region as a whole, but for our disconnected communities to understand were some of these strategies disproportionately impacting some of our communities, or particularly with the freight, were they benefiting some of the communities a little bit better? So where a lot of the dirtier vehicles are. Next slide. This exercise so far has really been sort of a sensitivity analysis to help us think through various strategies and how they can, how they'll play out in our region. It wasn't meant to be a comprehensive list of all the strategies that could be entailed to reduce emissions in the region. One thing you read in the literature is that we really need an all of the above approach if we're gonna reach our emissions goals. We haven't modeled all of these strategies together. Each of them, as I said, had like a 1 to 4% impact on greenhouse gases. This year, we're hoping to explore whether these complement each other or sort of cannibalize each other, and how we can stack these together to achieve a little bit bigger impact. And finally, our modeling tools are getting better. So we know that greenhouse gas is an important and much more important than it has been in the past. We've done some modeling, particularly for RSPs and things like that, of greenhouse gases, but we continue to refine and improve some of our modeling tools as the year goes on. So next slide. Where are we trying to go? The red line on this chart sort of represents the baseline. This comes from our conformity modeling. It shows the projection of greenhouse gases out to 2050. And really, over the next year, we're going to be looking at scenarios that get us closer in line with international emissions goals. So the blue lines are just hypothetical. We're not sure what that line looks like yet. But we hope to develop scenarios and think about the policies that would need to reach those scenarios and really move the needle with, as I mentioned, a particular focus on freight sector. All right, I think next slide. So as I mentioned on the last slide, we're working towards trying to think about that goal and setting a target, and we want to involve all of you in that conversation. We're going to be doing the additional research on freight areas and thinking about how we can reach those goals. Next slide. If you're interested in going through some of our scenarios more in depth, I'm happy to set up a call with any of you to walk through some of the scenarios that we've done already. I'm interested to see what questions you have, and I'm curious if any of you want to share some of the efforts you've been working on to reduce greenhouse gases. So.
Thank you, Martin. We'll open up to questions. I do have one. It's probably something I've asked every time we've seen this presentation, and I'll probably continue to ask, and that is the CMAQ program and the modeling for that, are these, you mentioned that that there might be some parallels, but do they measure different things? You know, we just released a recommended approval of the CMAQ program today, and I'm just curious, do those projects and the things in there align with things that will benefit greenhouse gas emissions? Is there, you know, are they complementary?
Specifically the CMAQ?
Yeah, I mean, we go through modeling and, you know, congestion relief, air quality, and this is greenhouse gas. I'm just curious, are they in opposite directions, or investment in one does help the other?
Definitely. So as I mentioned, the PM 2.5 and things like that, most emissions are fairly correlated. When you reduce greenhouse gas emissions, you're reducing the NOx and all the other ones. So we do see fairly strong alignment between all of those emissions. So the CMAQ program prioritizes things based on, one of the main factors is their emissions reductions. So definitely helps our greenhouse gas goals and our air quality goals.
Okay. Are there any other questions for Martin? Leah?
Sorry, I had to find unmute. I just really wanted to say this work is so important, and it's great to get an update on it. There are a lot of pieces of it that do raise a lot of questions for me about how stuff is working in the model and other things that you're seeing. So I'll save some of those for a separate conversation and not try to go through them all here in Transportation Committee. But the one slide that I just wanted to sort of emphasize, I guess, is that work from home transit, you know, because it did move the needle on greenhouse gas, but it also moved the needle substantially on transit. And it's a really interesting puzzle. One of the things that I think we're seeing preliminarily in some of the replica data is that trips overall actually haven't gone down that much, but transit trips have gone down substantially. And if that's the case, how do you continue to provide a level of transit service that's attractive and financially sustainable within the current context that we have, that would make people want to use transit, right? And so you have like this really sort of difficult contradiction within that, right? We want to, maybe we can keep people from using their cars so much if they're working from home. Maybe they're just making other trips that are less convenient on transit, and that kind of pulls resources away from the transit system. And what does that mean on a global level? So anyway, I have a lot of questions about how the model is working and how it's treating transit trips. Prior models have had a harder time predicting transit behavior, just, you know, not get into the details of it or the weeds. And I'm really interested in some of the induced demand that you saw too, that great slide was really compelling. So good work. We'd love to talk to you more.
Sure. Yeah, we'd be happy to set up a follow-up call, talk through this. So.
Fig?
Sure. Hi. Very nicely presented. Martin, I put this in the chat, and I'm just wondering how we will also start to grapple with, like, in the scenarios, I see obviously like the big things that we know can move the needle: change in fuel, regionally significant projects, change in lifestyle patterns, which, you know, within our like existing, okay, those things, it's obvious to understand how building and infrastructure can affect patterns and then those downstream impacts on trips taken and therefore emissions. But one of the like other kind of seemingly counterintuitive things is, you know, we just had our press event this week on our bike network expansion within the city. Is, you know, the last 10 years between the Great Recession and the beginning of the pandemic, we see in the National Household Travel Survey data, which is very crude, like a doubling of bike trips, right? I know it's a doubling from a small amount to still a small amount, but that is almost just like behavior change, right? We can link it to some infrastructure, but I don't think it's like a linear behavior to anything we're necessarily doing, but it's a non-linear behavior that people are making new choices in response oftentimes to the same environment, seeing, you know, bike riding where they're just, you know, we didn't necessarily do anything at CDOT. Like to take credit for what we do. So how can we use the model to kind of capture that some portion of this, like you're saying, silver buckshot, right? Multiple strategies is going to perhaps be in this, like people just make up different choices. Maybe the tolerance to congestion fundamentally changes, I hope, for the better, but maybe with self-driving electric cars where you're watching YouTube, potentially for the worse. That I don't mind so much traveling an hour and 15 minutes. Because this sort of backcasting of behavior oftentimes kind of show these small transformative type changes in the way people make decisions that are, when we calibrate out of like existing household travel survey, can't capture that at a moment in time.
Yeah. So I think, like you said, there's a big role for everything makes a difference. Obviously, biking and things like that are emissions free. One issue we saw in the modeling is that biking and walking typically impacts our shorter trips, and even transit a little bit impacts our shorter trips, and we have fewer emissions on shorter trips. And so as we reduce those shorter trips, we don't get quite the bang for the buck that we might really hope, at least from a number of trips share. So it's a complicated problem. And that's one reason we're sort of looking at the freight. That's the big, you know, if you can eliminate one freight truck or make it green somehow, that's really a much bigger fish to pull out of the emissions equation. But we've got to reduce emissions in every sector, not just freight. So passenger vehicles, you know, if density enables fewer trips or more biking and walking, all of those things are factors that help. So
thanks.
Audrey?
Yeah, this is really great, and I'm excited to see more information about greenhouse gas impacts of our transportation choices and investments. There has been some recent research in terms of the value of transit on land use, and the fact that walkable communities result transit friendly and walkable communities result in less DMT, even if people are not riding transit. How are you able to incorporate land use changes into your modeling, or how are you accounting for that, even if it's not always a transit ride, but the positive impact of a transit system on our region?
Yeah, so I had a slide that sort of showed land use was a little bit out of scope for our initial modeling because it can be, you can go in a lot of different directions with it. But I think it does have a role to play, particularly in encouraging people to use alternative modes and things like that. We have not directly looked at land use yet, but that is on our radar. And you've sent me a study that sort of looked at the number of trips people take. And we've done a little bit of research on that, but we have more to do. So.
Are there other questions? Martin, you mentioned reductions. Specifically, I think I heard the comment, reductions in freight. But we see what's happening in our world with just-in-time delivery, and every corner has an Amazon fulfillment center. So, those, is it reductions, but is it also more efficient transfer and movement of that freight as well? Again, I think Leah mentioned, I really found it interesting. The model was counterintuitive by shifting traffic and truck traffic, particularly at night, and that really didn't have the benefit you would have thought. So it was counterintuitive. And so some of those things of shifting when things are delivered didn't have the effect that we thought. So I think that was kind of interesting. Similar to what Leah said, is the model given the results that are intuitive? And that one was not.
Yeah, and I think a model that gives me a result I didn't expect is the most interesting model. So with freight, there's a variety of different strategies. We've done some freight plans where we look at, just getting freight to have an efficient path. So locating freight facilities in areas that they can make an efficient trip and things like that. The thing we looked at was, getting them out of congestion and things like that actually does reduce the emissions of the freight vehicles. So that's important, and getting them in a more efficient route. But the other big strategy that we're really going to be talking a lot about is alternative fuels. And it is relatively simple for passenger vehicles that can charge at home and make relatively short trips. But these freight vehicles that make longer haul trips need a little bit more complicated of a system to charge and things like that if they're electric, or refuel if they're using alternative fuels. So with sort of the demands on freight are a little more extreme, and we'll be looking into that over the next year.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? I'm not seeing any. Oh, I'm sorry, Leah, there you go. Yep.
All right, Chris, one more really short follow-up comment, which was just building on that. I was really interested in that right-hand side of the chart that was some of the electrification, and how prioritization of where we electrify could potentially change how the needle moves. And Martin, I think your point about it being a lot more complicated to electrify some of the industries is a really good. Some other thoughts that I'll hold for now on that, but interested to talk more.
All right, thank you, everyone.
Okay, thank you, Martin. We'll move on to agenda item 8, which is legislative update. And I understand that CMAP staff is available to answer any questions, but they don't have an update necessarily to provide. But CMAP staff is available if we have specific questions on anything happening. None at the state level, federal level. They're just trying to avoid a shutdown. So, okay, all right. Well, thank you. We'll move on to item number 9, other business. As mentioned earlier at the beginning of the meeting, I think we're going to be joined by Angela to provide just an overview of the update activities of the UWP committee. So I'll just turn it over to Angela.
Thank you, Chris. I'm trying to get my camera together. I'm sorry. Yes, thank you. Good morning, Transportation Committee. Thank you for allowing me this opportunity to provide you with an update on the FY23 program. Today, I'm here to provide you with a quick overview of the 23 UWP program and timeline that's outlined in your call for projects memo. The program will include this year a core and competitive program. If you recall, last year, the competitive program was deferred until this year to allow for the committee to explore and evaluate program enhancement opportunities. All the 22 funding was allocated last year to core programming activities for all of our UWP partner agencies. With the, as with last year's program, funding allocations will align with the planning areas emphasized in On to 2050. Over the course of the last 6 months, we started this process back in February. The UWP committee workshop recommendations to improve the selection of projects and overall performance of the competitive program. As a result of those meetings, the committee approved on the 22nd of this month improvements that included a more defined scope development process, a process for tracking the performance of projects that will allow for greater transparency with full project plans, but more importantly, the committee is committed to greater involvement in the evaluation and review of projects throughout the fiscal year. And finally, a new selection evaluation process was adopted by the group. The federal earmark for 23 will be determined early October. We're actually waiting on that information from our federal and state partners, and once that information is available, we will share with all committee members. The full schedule for the program is outlined in your memo. The plan is for the call for projects memo to be released on October 1st, and the full FY23 program, which will include core and competitive programming, will be presented to the Transportation Committee for review and approval in January of 22. And so with that, I'm happy to take any questions.
Hey, Chris, I have a question for Angela. Angela, you've made reference to the memo. I don't believe that I've seen the memo. I don't think that went to the Transportation Committee members. And if it did, it somehow got lost in my inbox in the last couple of days. So can that be sent out to the Transportation Committee members?
Yeah, I'll have to defer to Doug. I saw it on the website, but I don't know how it was actually distributed to the committee.
Oh,
Sorry,
so it was just posted.
Yeah, so it got posted. I did throw a link to it in the chat for everyone. I will send it out to all the members as well.
Yeah, as you sent the materials out, I pulled it down. I think Monday I pulled the materials down. So if you guys are going to be adding things throughout the course of the week, it would be helpful if we could just get a notice.
My apologies.
Thank you. And again, I thought I did see it in the chat as well come down, but it was, I think if you scroll up, but again, it was just, I think after we made the comment. So, okay. Thank you. Any other comments for Angela?
Chris, this is Jessica. Yeah, I'll make a comment. Thank you, Angela, so much for that update. And thanks to CMAP, as always, for your excellent work on the committee. At RTA, we've been pretty vocal about this process and our frustration with the changes to the competitive program, mostly because it's the region's really, I think, best example of performance-based programming. And we've spent a lot of time at RTA trying to shape our programming processes to reflect a lot of the great work that CMAP does and that we as a region should be moving toward. So we were really sort of frustrated by the process of considering dropping it, and I think we're in a good place. I think we have voiced our frustration to CMAP. We have been vocal at the committee meetings. We've been talking with many of you, and we feel like our concerns have been heard, which we really appreciate. And we're not 100% happy with all of the changes, but we are pleased with where we landed on a compromise, and we're, I think, eager to see how this will hopefully shape change in a way that CMAP wants to see toward faster spending of the funds and making sure that we're not sitting in them too long, but also kind of keeping space for that performance-based programming, keeping space for us to really push planning funds towards things that come up that we want to get behind as a region that aren't the same as the core funds. So thank you for listening to us. Thank you for shaping change. We hope to be supportive of it going forward.
Thank you, Jessica. The UWP committee, you're right. There was a lot of conversation, but I think we all came to a good compromise, and the committee was able to approve the program on Wednesday.
Okay, and let's see, other business. I think Holly wanted to make a plug if she could. So I think Holly, if you're out there.
Sure. Good morning, everyone. I'm sure you all have seen the data-driven decisions tool that was announced, tool we're seeking outreach on it, that was announced last week, Friday, I believe, or maybe it's been 2, the days go so fast. But we have a webinar scheduled next week, Wednesday, and so please make sure to register for that. If you're interested, we are going to be doing some polling during that, where we're going to be asking questions of the attendees. And we're going to explain the tool a little more in depth. And I just wanted to make you all aware of it. Please also share it as much as you can with your counterparts or anyone who's interested. We're trying to get as much input as we can on this tool because I think that's going to make it a better product. So thank you all very much, and I look forward to hearing the feedback.
Thank you, Holly. Does anybody else have anything to bring before the committee under other business? Oh, Leah.
My apologies. Thanks, Chris. The data-driven tool, is there a way that we can access a link or some written materials on what that is?
For sure. I will put something in the chat. And then if you just Google, I know how user-friendly IDOT's website is, but if you just Google IDOT data-driven decisions, you should get it.
Thank you.
Okay, no other business coming before the group. We'll move on to public comment. I don't know if we've received anything during the meeting or if any members of the public that may be out there would like to make a statement.
Chris, we did receive one comment in advance of the meeting.
Okay.
It's quite long, so bear with me, but I'm going to read it. Good morning. My name is John Paul Jones, founder and president with Sustainable Englewood Initiatives, a locally based advocacy group working on social and economic equity matters. I wish to add value to the fiscal year 2022 to 2026 transportation program. First, we request that the abandoned elevated railroad track located along 59th Street within the Greater Englewood District be considered for capital investment. The city's Department of both Planning and Transportation own the rail corridor. In 2009, the corridor was featured as the Burnham Centennial Project. This 2-mile trail needs to be embraced by CMAP Transportation Committee and Board. It's important to note that this corridor has a natural connection along Hamilton Avenue that stretches to the Dan Ryan Woods at 87th Street. Most recently, CDOT partnered with CSX Railroad Company to finance the long-awaited 71st Hamilton Avenue underpass. We are extremely pleased that the region is moving to recognize the air pollution problems in that sector and are now moving with zeal to both improve air quality and rail commerce. In addition, the local group Grow Greater Englewood is near completion of its consultant report on advancing the new ERA trail. We are requesting capital investment to conduct environmental remediation and engineering design for the Englewood line, locally known as the new ERA trail. Secondly, I provide technical and organizing support to a host of Roseland organizations and churches. it is important that the Transportation Committee prepare itself to schedule an earlier year for construction dollars from 2026 to 2024. This would allow the community a continual flow of advocacy support to fully fund the CTA Red Line Extension project. Thank you for this opportunity to share our public investment request for important South Regional transportation projects. So that's it. That was the comment that was submitted. I would just like to, if I could just make a statement on that, since the for the CMAQ funding that was programmed for the Red Line Extension project, yes, it was placed in 2026. With the CMAQ program, we oftentimes program funds in years that aren't necessarily requested. We work with sponsors to move funds into the appropriate year based upon when things start moving. As Leo will probably tell you, this is a very complicated project. It can go in many different directions, and we're going to work with the project. So it's not just because it's in 2026 doesn't mean that's where it's going to be when it's all said and done. The ERA trail, that was not included as a project submitted for the program. As you're all aware, the Project Selection Committee and Transportation Committee don't generate projects for the program. We look to our implementers throughout the region to do that in submitting them for applications. So we would strongly work with the applicants on this project as it goes forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Doug. Any other comments from members of the audience? I don't see any. I don't know that I even know if I see any. I'll defer to Lindsay. Okay. Okay, perfect. So then we'll move on to item number 11. Our next meeting is scheduled for November 19th, 2021. And with that, I will call this meeting adjourned.